Well, it seems like we have a lot of people here, so I will get started. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Marion Slawson. I'm currently the Acting Director of the Library and Learning Spaces at Federation University Library, and I'm also the Chair of the CAVAL Professional Development Interest Group, also known as PDIG. I'd like to welcome everyone to this first webinar in the Boost Your Comms Cred with Negotiation and Networking webinar series, hosted by CAVAL and PDIG. On behalf of CAVAL and the PDIG committee, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations peoples attending today. I'm joining you from beautiful Wadawurrung country, and I encourage you to share which country you are attending from in the chat. If you have any technical questions during the session, please type your question into the chat and the CAVAL team will assist you. Today we are running a panel discussion with three panelists from various areas of the academic library industry. Bronwyn Hicks and Clare Carlsson are both from Deakin University, where Bronwyn is publisher licensing consultant, collections, copyright and licensing, and Clare is the Director of Client Services and the Deputy University Librarian. Jaime McCowan is the CEO at CAVAL and is also joining the panel today. To start off, the panel will discuss a few different workplace negotiation scenarios in order to provide their best tips for how to tackle them. This will then be followed by questions and scenarios posed by the audience. If you have questions for the panel throughout the session or would like to pose a scenario, please ask them through the Slido link which has been added to the chat at https://app.slido.app.gqd7ne10. Just go to the link in the chat, that would be best. Go to slido.com or the Slido app and use the event code number 752993. So feel free to pose your questions or scenarios or vote on some of the scenarios that were provided as part of the registration by people in Slido, and we'll get to those. But we'll start off with asking some of the questions that the PDIG group prepared for the panel. And so I will turn to the panel now, thank you, and just ask them if they can consider a couple of these scenarios to get us started. So the first one I'm going to ask is for the entire panel, and I'm going to ask you to consider, on occasion, staff are approached by different managers with requests to assist with services or projects. How can you negotiate with the different managers about what takes precedence and what gets put on the back burner for the time being? Any thoughts from the panel?
Sounds like the perfect interview question, doesn't it? You know, how do you juggle competing demands?
Does a bit.
So,
yep.
so I think a lot of people might, you know, have some ideas around this, but usually it's taking the time to unpick what the demand actually is and what the deadline is. And once you know the extent of what's being asked, and once you know the deadline, you can then usually come up with a solution. But it usually, you know, it very much is negotiation, I think, is like the word liaison. It has a lot of subtleties in it. And I think if you pick those subtleties, it's not about bargaining for the best outcome. You know, like going to the lowest common denominator or the highest, whatever you want, you actually get in there and you're concerned for both sides to make sure it works for everyone.
So thank you, Claire. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball in there though. And so what if both managers say, well, my project is super important and it needs to happen now? Any tips?
Well, I would pull rank. Sorry.
You can pull rank.
Or throw somebody else, you know, at the project. It's we sometimes get very fixed on who we think we can do something for us, and we, you know, we get in there and go, oh, you know, because I used them last time, I'll get, you know, I want Kim on the project, or I want somebody on the Sabina on the project, or something like that. But really, when you there's other people that can often help or assist the person with the competing deadlines. So you need at times to throw more resources at something if you deem them both very important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jaime, do you have any thoughts about this one?
Yeah, when I was thinking about it, it was about knowing when you're going into that conversation, knowing what a good solution could be. So you're going to be informed about exactly what Claire said, like pick apart what the issue actually is and what you're trying to deliver. And then you go into that negotiation with, well, this is an idea that I have. So then too, if that manager or whoever tries to say, well, mine is more important, then you can go through, well, this is how it will be delivered. And I think sort of confirming them and providing a solution would also be helpful in that situation.
And I might add there as well, if it's two managers, perhaps those two managers, I would suggest, need to speak to each other and work it out between them, and then filter it down to the people working on the project.
Yeah, that's great. So lots of lateral thinking ideas. So yeah, I guess I'm hearing a lot of kind of don't freeze and don't be stressed out by the request. Just put your brain into action, think about what sort of alternatives there could be to helping both people achieve the outcome that they want.
And it could be a compliment in the way, as Claire's saying, they have an idea that you're the one that can do all these things. So but then you have to come back and say, well, this is what I'm actually managing and this is what I'm capable of.
And often projects have logical steps. So if you can think about what steps need to be done first and break something down into what's manageable, reinterpret the information you've been given really about it. It can often be that you can kickstart something and get it to a certain point, and then that's a compromise, and compromise is fine. You know, we all have to compromise in life, you know, so I think that's all part of it.
That's true. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so Graham in the chat has said it's tricky when someone who reports to you gets asked, and if you question, you get accused of micromanaging. Any comments about that?
It's your job to ask. Sorry, Graham. No easy wins on that one. You know, you can dive into far too much detail, but if somebody in your team has said, I'm so stressed, I'm under the pump, I've got all these, you know, things that are going on, and I you know, can't get started on some of these things, and you need to then unpick with them why are they like that? When did this get out of hand, and what's been asked of them? So you know, there is that thing about trying to govern too much. I understand it's a tricky line about wanting to know too many details, but if the person has come to you stressed, well, then you must, as their manager, intervene.
No, and are they coming to you with some solutions as well of how it could help them work it through themselves?
Yeah, very true. All good advice. Thank you. So if there's no more comments about that particular scenario, another one that is been very popular, we think, amongst the audience is to do with negotiating pricing and contracts with vendors. So what suggestions do you have in order to negotiate pricing and contracts with vendors? And I'll probably ask Bronwyn and Jaime to start off the conversation here. Thank you.
Yeah, I did a little bit of thinking about this in advance, and when I thought about it, I think there's really like 5 key tips that I certainly keep at the forefront of my mind, which I'll try not to waffle on for too long, but they're know your vendor, tweak your approach, look at the big picture, understand the history, and build relationships. And what I mean about knowing your vendor, so the way that you might approach a negotiation with a vendor depending on who they are. So if it's Elsevier, you might want to be quite direct, they're obviously huge. It's going to be different to the tactics that you might use with a small time publisher that you're just subscribing to something quite small on. And tweaking your approach, I think, is really important, particularly year on year. You know, we might have a supplier for decades, and every year the contract comes around, we negotiate on the pricing. It's really important that you don't go in with the same tactics every year. So we might say for 5 years, oh, we're under financial strain, and that may be true, but if you go in with that same approach, then that argument becomes less meaningful. So you've got to change your approach and don't be too templated. I think that's really important. Looking at the bigger picture is, for me, I think sometimes we want to get a gain right now, but sometimes I think that can actually, if you look further into the future, can have implications. So you might go in really hard on a negotiation and get a fantastic outcome, maybe a price freeze, maybe a decrease, but what's that going to look like next year and the year after? Is the publisher going to then, they're going to, well, I mean, it's inevitable, they're going to want to recoup funds. And yeah, I think that's important to sort of take some measured steps there to make sure that you get a gain now, but is it actually going to mean that I'm going to end up paying more in the future? And also, I think sometimes if you go in too hard, you have to think about the relationship as well, that ongoing relationship between you know, your business and their business needs to stay really positive. Understanding the history is another thing as well. So I would always do lots of research before I embarked on anything too big in terms of negotiating. So for example, the approach you might take with a supplier who has not given you a price increase for 5 years, you know, you probably do have to meet them in the middle somewhere. But if it's a supplier who's jacked up prices by, you know, 6% every year, then, you know, you've got more power, you've got a bigger argument. And my fifth point is about building lasting relationships. So I think it's really important not to be scared to ask questions. That's what the reps are there for. So ask away, find the right tone. So I personally, I find it good to be quite direct. I think people are really busy. Everyone just wants to get stuff done. And I think you just achieve better results if you're thinking really clearly from the start and just laying out what your expectations are. And you can do that without sounding arrogant. I think you build up a mutual respect over time. And once you develop those great working relationships with suppliers, I think you have better outcomes. When people respect you and they like you, they want to help you more. I think that's a fact in all aspects of life. So they're my 5 tips on that point.
They're great tips. Thank you, Bronwyn.
That's okay.
Ask, in terms of what you said about being direct and that communication style, which is perhaps not something that we're necessarily accustomed to in the library world, do you think that's where we're meeting a different culture in a different organisation that has more of a commercial imperative than we do, where we see ourselves much more as service providers? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not a librarian, but I work obviously with lots of librarians, and I came from the private sector, working with a publisher, not an academic publisher, but a publisher nevertheless. And I think that has been useful because having sort of been on both sides of the fence, I do know how hard you can push. And I definitely know when I came into my area at Deakin, everyone has this amazing service mentality, and it's so lovely. But I think sometimes we restricted ourselves because we'd think, oh no, we're not allowed to do that. Whereas I'm more like, well, no, let's try and get the most out of this so we can, knowing that on the other side of the fence, you've got a whole team of people there that are waiting for you to ask those questions, like where you're the client. So I suppose that's the difference, isn't it? Like, librarians are used to, providing for clients, whereas in this case, we're the client.
We are the client.
Yeah.
That's a really great observation. Thank you. Yeah,
no
appreciate
worries.
that. Jaime, I'm sure you've got lots to say about negotiating contracts and dealing with vendors as well.
A few things. I mean, the first thing that I had written down around this was to be upfront as well, because I mean, you're working through, and exactly what Bronwyn said, this it's like a good relationship is a good partnership. A good negotiation with this is around everyone leaving happy. Something that you said, Bronwyn, around the lines of like, if you're going in hard and they're accommodating you at that point in time, what does that really mean for the long-term relationship and the level of service that you're getting from them? If it's not really, they're not really leaving happy, it's not going to work. So it's about being open-minded. So when you're upfront, being informed, knowing what you want out of this negotiation, what you are willing to compromise or not, and just be prepared to have a discussion so that there's an understanding there. Just trying to think. Yeah, I mean, CAVAL sort of faces similar to the library in the way that sometimes we're the customer and sometimes we're sort of like the vendor. So we do have that sort of position of understanding both sides, and I think that it works best when it is a friendly negotiation that works well, is beneficial for everyone involved in the negotiation, and people leave happy.
Thank you. I'm going to ask both of you actually, because often I think when we get told to negotiate, we get told about what you were saying before, Jaime, about knowing what you're prepared to budge on and what you're not. We get told to keep our cards close to our chest, not put everything on the table. So how do you feel about that? Do you think transparency is the way to go?
I honestly do. Like, I don't know how that's helpful, because I feel like it's testing them, and that's not going to help with the relationship at all. Like, I think how are they going to know what you need and to be able to deliver on that if you don't tell them? So, I mean, I think also too, with the industry, and Bronwyn might want to comment with her experience, is that it is generally looking out for the best for the customer in most ways. So I do think it's best to say, this is essentially, obviously there's some things that you would keep close maybe, but in general, they need to have a good idea of what you want out of this agreement.
Yeah, I think so. Just, yeah, it's good for both parties just to set really clear expectations.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. It sounds like that sort of whole, keep your cards close to your chest is quite old-fashioned then, and that things are moving away from that approach. So much more to a relationship building, win-win kind of approach, which is much more collaborative than competitive in terms of negotiating. Would you agree with that?
It does depend a little bit. Depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think who, like I was saying before, one of my points, who you're dealing with. Like when you're dealing with the big players, I definitely take a very different approach, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's always win-win. And I would suggest that a lot of publishers definitely don't feel like things are win-win at the moment, because we have had great success with call, and over the last 2 years during COVID, getting some pretty remarkable price freezing and whatnot. But so I don't know if the publishers would see that as win-win. Yes, but yeah, I think it varies. And like the type of contracts and the type of publishers that we're dealing with, it varies wildly. Yeah, we've got some tiny ones, some huge ones, completely different resources. So I don't know if there's a blanket rule on that one.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. It is good to know that there's a range of approaches, and that you obviously have to have a broad range of skills and not going with the sledgehammer. Really think about what you can pull out of your armoury in any particular situation. Yeah. It's a nice little segue into another question. And we can come back to vendors if people want to know more. Just pop the questions in the Slido. But just thinking about tips for negotiating when you're not in a position of power. And I know that this is a tricky question, it's very broad, but I'm thinking there would be all kinds of situations when you don't feel like you're in the powerful position, and it might be with some of the publishing behemoths like Elsevier. It might be because you're dealing with the Vice Chancellor, it might be because, you're dealing with a particularly insistent academic. Any tips for that?
Well, I mean, I can throw in, I guess, like just while we're talking about contracts, we definitely have resources we know are critical for teaching and learning, and the publishers know that we need them, and that we probably can't get them anywhere else. So you definitely don't have a great deal of power in that situation, because rule number one of negotiating is be prepared to walk away, but you can't really walk away. And that's, it would be a big deal if you're going to walk away, and it would take a lot of consultation and an alternative resource. And so that you do lose power. But I think that going back to those relationships, although the publisher has the power in that sense, thinking of ourselves as the client, you have power in the fact that they want to keep you on the books and they want to maintain that relationship. So that in a sense is power as well. And you can still appeal, even if they do hold that more powerful position, in terms of them knowing you can't walk away. You can still appeal to that relationship and wanting to keep that relationship, sustainable, I suppose. So I think there's other ways. It changes the conversation. It would change the way that I would approach the negotiation. But you have to find other little ways to kind of open up that discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Because I think you've illustrated really well that sometimes even when you don't think you've got power, you do.
That was the first point I put down. Try to consider the power that you do have in the relationship. And as you say, it's such a broad, could be with a publisher or a vice chancellor or something. It has to be something that you consider before that discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Do you have any other thoughts, Jaime or Claire?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much dependent on the person and if what the negotiation is about and who's initiating it and all these things. I think sometimes there's something around when you're negotiating too that you might need to have multiple conversations, and you might need to be patient and understand that it's not going to be one discussion that sorts these things out. You need to maybe have multiple discussions about different things, go away, come back and reconsider. And also, when you get a level of understanding of what the outcome is going to be, or what the outcome of the negotiation is, that there's still things to work through sometimes. I learned this in some negotiations that I have, and someone referred to them, which I thought was so good, as wrinkles that you just have to iron out. So you've got this like good understanding, but there's still some ironing out that you need to do through the conversation.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, and allowing that little bit of time for the person that, that you're presenting an idea to. So I think Bron's 5 key rules can apply to any situation, really, not even just the negotiation part. So knowing what you're asking for and being logical about it and taking out the emotion. Now, having said that, that can get very hard at times, especially if you're emotional. I'm quite reactive, so I can get quite emotional about things at times, but it doesn't get me anywhere. So it's much better if you just take that bit of time, use pauses, which is something I try and practice all of the time. I'm not real great at it, but I practice. I have this thing, give the pause, give the person time to actually think about what you're saying, and they can then reinterpret it in their own way, because people have different ways of working through what the issues are. So the pause and the giving time to reflect and sort of reflect, not just reflecting, it's sort of more reinterpreting what you're saying into their own way. And if you're speaking to an accountant, they don't want the story, they want the facts. So know who you're talking to and how they like to work. I think it doesn't matter what level you are, it is always about your knowledge of the issue at hand. That wins out every time.
It's a good point, actually, because I'm thinking, whoever you're talking with may not have any insight into all of the information that you have, or what you prioritise or value. So I guess you need to be prepared to give them the information that they need in order to be able to change their mind. They may have do you think that happens, that people have a fixed idea based on a certain set of information, and once you're able to impart that and then give them time and space to reflect, then that does actually help?
Absolutely. How can they know? How can someone in a position, if you're saying at power of a vice chancellor level or something, know everything that's going on with everyone? So I think you need to give them that information. And I think it's also okay to say that when you're, if there's a outcome that you're not happy with, that you feel comfortable to say so in the way that you're comfortable with, like, well, this is not what I was thinking, or this will not work for me. And maybe it's still an ongoing conversation. But I like what you were saying too, Claire, about the pausing, and the pausing can be even like a day and another conversation when they're reflecting, or longer.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I was thinking, you know, how often we have a conversation with someone and say, let's sleep on it. You know, you just need that reflective time to come back and let things sit. Thank you. Look,
and sleep on something before you have the conversation.
And that too, yep. And it is a
handy.
good point about taking the emotion out of it, Claire, as well. And if that just means delaying, not responding emotionally, that can certainly help, I think, with the power, that sense of power that you've got control over perhaps yourself and your own arguments, and you're in a position to go. Thank you. Look, I might just switch to the Slido because there's quite a few questions there that people are slowly but surely rating up. So the top question at the moment is, I guess, a bit of a pertinent one to the current environment, unfortunately, and it is, when your position is made redundant, how do you respond, negotiate and network with dignity as well as maintain resilience? So pushing the boundaries of the remit here a bit, but I guess, you know, if we focus on the negotiation part, in terms of a redundancy, is there room to negotiate, do you think?
Well, I'd love to say yes. I don't think there's a huge amount of room to move if positions have been identified. But usually in some sort of, you know, like a sweeping major workplace change, there will be other positions that open up, or there will be a feedback time. And I think, you know, you really need to use the feedback time very effectively and put forward, you know, not just from your own point of view, but most probably from an operational point of view, what would happen without you being in that role. But also you've got to think more broadly and maybe look at another area for your career, because the sorts of things that are going on across universities across Australia is that there'll be either a spill and a fill. So, you know, that's when there's too many people in and they're only opening up 3 jobs instead of and the 5 people that were in them. So you've got every right to, you know, apply for your own job and do the very best that you can when you do that. Try and take the emotion out of it, which is really hard, but have somebody to debrief with before you do that. And then, you know, but look more broadly, because there will be other spills and fills happening within your organisation. And what a lot of library people don't understand is that they have transferable skills that can work really well in so many different situations. And then it's up to you to convince the panel that you've got the right skills in there.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm feeling like that's a negotiating situation where people do feel a little bit powerless. So you're really focusing there on the sorts of things they can do to bring back that power to themselves, even if it means that the outcome doesn't change in terms of the actual redundancy applying, but what they can do to take control and, you know, think about what they want to do. Any other thoughts?
It's a highly emotional time.
Yeah, it is.
There's panic, there's emotion, there's upset, there's hurt. There's so many things going on in that space. It's very hard to unpick.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if the negotiation is also, I mean, the decision might be made about the position, but what the organization is doing to help you with those next steps, maybe negotiating, because I know there's lots that the companies can or organizations can do to help somebody in the next steps of what's going on, and there's different levels of assistance and what they're trying to achieve. So that may be what you're negotiating.
Yeah, maybe buying some time, or do you mean, Jaime? Or
I mean more like, I mean, assistance in finding your next role or your next job,
right.
or what's happening,
Yep.
or
Yeah.
Yeah,
so what support can be offered in terms of
Mm.
preparing your resume and preparing for interviews and all the sorts of tips that Claire was saying you can do. Yeah, I think that they're probably quite variable amongst institutions.
I think they would be too.
Yeah, yeah. But the question is about maintaining resilience, and what I'm hearing are all the kinds of things that would hopefully help people, you know, once you've gotten over the hurt and all of the negative feelings that come with this happening, to help people, you know, these positive actions do help boost your resilience, and yeah, put yourself back out there.
And it might be well worth going to a consultant about your resume or about your interviewing skills, especially if you haven't faced something like that for a long time, because resume, the way they're put together now is, you know, has changed a lot. And even addressing selection criteria isn't as asked for anymore in positions. So it doesn't hurt to get some tips and tricks about that.
Especially if your organization will pay for you to do those things, which does happen.
And using some of the newer tools, I know LinkedIn isn't new, but it's definitely a great way to network and put yourself out there as well, something you might not have considered if you're not actually looking for a job. So, yeah, okay, look, thank you. Bronwyn, is there anything you wanted to say in relation to that, or shall I move on to the next question?
No, I think that Claire and Jaime have probably covered that one.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so this is a good one too. So nice and simple, how to make your voice heard by your managers.
I think it's about being prepared and you know, really sort of, you know, like if you've got a great idea, then, you know, present it really well and go in, you know, with the knowledge and preparation. I think that gets you off on a good foot and helps your voice to be heard for sure.
Also knowing your manager and how they like to you know, have these ideas delivered and receive them, and if they like you to come in like guns blazing with these big ideas, or just slowly introduce them in a way that they can, you know, understand and manage. I think I had experience actually in that, where if I came in really enthusiastic about something, it was like this, whoa, just calm down, and so it was about how I approached it really bit by bit, and building that understanding of, because you're informed, because you know what you're going in to say, and slowly building the understanding of that person to the point where you get to that sharing of the idea.
And as Claire said before, you know, if you're talking to an accountant, they just want the facts. So knowing
Exactly.
information that your manager will pay attention to, I guess. Yeah. Claire, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think choose when to promote the idea. So have a think about whether it would be better in a one-on-one rather than in a group. I mean, I think we've all felt that time when you might have a bright idea and you introduce it in a group, and then all of a sudden it's sort of like, why didn't you talk to me about this before the meeting? You know, it'd be better to get there. So hard lessons learned, but by me in particular. So I think, and it's all understanding the person, like Jaime said, and, you know, understanding who you're dealing with and how they like information presented, but it's also in what setting do they, that's another dimension to it as well. One-on-one, in an email first, suggesting a meeting or suggest the meeting, this is the idea, and, you know, really think about your communication style.
And I think it depends a little, like the different kind of area that you might be working in. If you're sort of in a team that works on a lot of projects and you're used to kind of churning through those, you know, you might have a manager who's quite used to kind of being presented with lots of different ideas. But if you're in a very process-driven area that's done things a certain way for a very long time, which I'm sure most libraries, you know, might be able to relate to a little bit, you might have to just, be a little bit more tactical and really put sort of that back leg, you know, the work in to kind of really pitch it. I think it was Adele. I saw a message come up on the chat before, but yeah, you'd have to pitch it really, really well and you know, really get the detail in there if you're in a very detailed driven area.
And again, it might be more than one conversation.
Yes.
So understanding if you share an idea and it gets a negative response in the first instance, maybe adjust your approach or think about what's next.
Yeah, and I would also add to that too, you know, getting your voice heard by your managers. They're not a homogenous group. They're all individuals. And so they will all tap into something different potentially. So, and Jaime, coming back to, you know, might not be one conversation. It might also be try a different person, you know. So
yes,
if you've tried hard with, would you recommend that, you know?
I think so. Yeah, I think gathering support is very helpful in the ideas as well. Sharing ideas.
So perhaps colleagues even as well.
Colleagues
so,
even, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, but I just would put in a little bit of caution in them. Don't make it seem as though you're going around the obstacle or behind their back, because then that will shoot your idea down forever and a day, you know. So if an idea doesn't seem to be well received, perhaps you could come to, and this would be the negotiation, come to a bit of a compromise about it and say, well, maybe I don't have enough information on this. Is it okay if I go and get a bit more information, or I talk to so-and-so, or would you be happy if we got together in another meeting to discuss it? So I think there still needs to be that upfrontness about what, that you haven't let it go, that you're still wedded to it, and, you know, but there's ways and good ways to do it, I think.
Be sensitive in your approach.
That's a good point, Claire, coming back to that transparency, but it's also showing, I think, a degree of persistence and perseverance, which anybody I would think would have to pay attention to unless it's complete madness, you know. So, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, look, this is a good one too, I think, and is particularly relevant in the higher education sector, where we have people employed at particular Q levels, so higher education worker levels. And I think this is reflecting the kind of boundaries that come with people's roles, whether that's because of the actual work that they primarily do or the Q level that they're at. And it's, how do I negotiate an opportunity? I want to try a project and develop my skills, but I'm told it's beyond my role.
Told by the manager, their manager, it's beyond their role?
Not sure. It's not stated. Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah,
it is. I'm sort of struggling to find the right answer for that one.
Yeah, you can't ask anybody to do anything consistently above their Q level or what they've been employed to do. But if it's a short stint on something, yes, you can be a bit more giving, but also ensuring that they have the support to do the role that they want to do. So good ideas don't stop at you know, Q level 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good ideas can come from anywhere. And it's really then about the way that the idea gets implemented that might stretch a few, but asking for somebody to be a mentor over the time that you want, that the project you want to sort of get started is, that means that you're not taking the full responsibility for it, and you're sharing that responsibility with somebody else who you trust. It could be that could be a way to negotiate you're still getting the role done, and there is such a thing as, we all know, high duties allowance. So if it is a really good project and very well accepted, you could, for a very short period of time, be paid at a higher Q level to see how the project goes. But that's, once again, working you know, clever about it, and making sure that there's time within your schedule to actually get something done with it.
I think that's possibly speaking to, you know, often the concern is, well, what about the core part of your role? Will that be neglected if you're taking and putting all this time into a particular project that's outside of the scope of your usual role, especially in these times?
So your interpretation of that, Claire, was it that the issue is around they wouldn't want to pay them more? That's...
No, not necessarily. I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that I thought stepped out of their hue level and their position description. So say if it was a project quite different to what they would, and if I was going to have a whole role of that sort of work, it would say if you were a 5 and it might be placed at a 7. So I would have grave hesitation in asking and letting anybody do a role that was well above their hue level. But maybe there's a way that you could work it through, that you could still do it and still have that, have somebody more senior working with you on it, becoming a project sponsor or doing it in that other way, or if the organisation accepts the project as good value and you would have the right skills to do it, allowing a higher duties allowance to so you could get it done. So there's a few ways you could negotiate the possibilities around that, but you know, we'd be taken up to the union if we were asking people to do things above their hue.
Yeah.
And it is limiting. I'm sorry, it is limiting at times, and it's frustrating for me as well as for the person.
So then it could be the negotiation is around how this project can still go ahead with that, maintaining within that hue level for the person to be able to still get their regular business as usual work done, and it's compromising maybe you doing the whole project, but it happens with the assistance of somebody else and others. Yeah. Could be a different way to look at it.
There's also times of the year.
Yeah.
It's true.
Sometimes are quieter.
Yeah.
Maybe at the start of T1 is or semester 1 isn't the best time to start on a new project.
Actually, it's a good point about a negotiation timing. Think about the time that you're asking the question. Yeah, it's a very good point. I was just thinking about that project as well, and thinking, because Claire, a lot of what you're saying is about sharing that responsibility, because a lot of hue level you know, structure is about responsibility. It's not everything, obviously, but it just means, I guess, if you're sharing that responsibility, you've got that oversight, or you've got colleagues who are also working, then you are perhaps, it does fit much more appropriately with the role that you currently have, or could, do you think? Is that the purpose of the mentor or sponsor, or have I misread that?
No, but I think that shares the responsibility and also will ensure the project's success if you have somebody more senior as a sponsor, and possibly then be able to pull in other people to help when and if you need it, if you don't have a particular skill. So I don't think there's any harm in trying to still push forward with a project, but it's about getting the people around you to ensure success, because it'll be seen as your success even if you share it with somebody.
Yeah,
and show it to the manager in a way that it's their success as well. What's in it for them? How does it make them look successful for this project to go ahead?
That's great, thank you. Any other thoughts, or shall I move on to the next question? This is another good one for the panel then. Okay, so do you have tips on creating and renewing dialogue with unfriendly stakeholders? So they could be, I guess, colleagues, or they could be external people.
I mean, personally, I don't think I would just, we have some vendors that are more difficult than others, but I wouldn't say unfriendly, because that wouldn't really be in their best interest to be unfriendly when we're their clients. So difficult, like definitely have people that can be uncompromising, or perhaps I don't like their tone. But in that case, that's when you have to be direct and professional and not let it bother you too much. Just kind of keep working towards the common goal.
It's interesting, Bronwyn. I'm wondering if in applying that label of unfriendly, you're actually putting them in a box where they may not possibly belong. You know, maybe you're underestimating their ability to be friendly.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. I would imagine that client services, sorry, Claire, you would have more experience on this topic.
Sometimes we get unfriendly letters from students and academics about, the slight or whatever it is, and it's it comes back to that whole customer service ethic, which we do have in spades. So it is unpicking the problem, trying to take the emotion out of it, because usually it's very emotional. And then in some ways you need to save the face of both sides. That horrible old win-win, I think, which always sounds so competitive, but that's so different to a win-win. It's allowing each person to sort of get a glimpse into what the other person was facing at that time and why the problem occurred in there. I've also faced some very unfriendly staff things, when and often they come from a sense of not feeling empowered, to have their opinion and their problem heard properly. And there's often a perception that you're, as the manager, you will take somebody's side in the argument. And that's really problematic and very hard to negotiate that fine line where, there's always, it takes two to tango, as the saying goes, and there's got to be some recognition about the underlying issues in that less than friendly scenario. You don't have to be friends with your colleagues. You can be friendly, but you don't have, being a friend of a colleague is a completely different thing. So it is a fine line that you often balance. You have to work with people that you don't particularly like. You wouldn't want to socialise with them. You wouldn't want to do, but treating with some level of trust and respect and trying to unpick what's happening on either side of the argument is generally what I have to do. Sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. It just really depends on the situation and how entrenched it is and how long it's been going on for. Sometimes you inherit unfriendly situations.
It's very true. Jaime, do you have any thoughts about that one?
Oh, I'm just thinking, I think about it, actually, there's been lots of situations where I've had to work with someone that I wasn't really that friendly with, but then you've got a common goal that you're trying to achieve. And so you absolutely don't need to be friends, but you find that way to work together. So it's not like, how do you approach it in your life and take that to work? Because you have to do that. You have to live with all types of people, work with all types of people, like find the way that works for you. Usually, you keep it as professional as possible and work towards that common goal and just keep it focused on that. And hopefully, you can work through whatever issues there are.
Thank you. Do you think there's much to be gained from trying to understand, like deeply understand the other person's perspective, or
I do think you need to listen to try to understand where they're coming from for an understanding of what, so there's that element of listening to what their circumstances are to help with understanding. Yeah, but sorry.
Oh no, I'm just sort of tapping into that. I think just even more like the last couple of years with COVID and some people potentially have become maybe more difficult than you're used to them being, because everyone's under immense, extraordinary pressure for whatever reason that might be. Maybe they've got kids at home, maybe they don't have anyone at home and they're lonely. So really trying to understand that people's reactions, especially at the moment, might be different to usual, that there's a real reason for it, so I think it helps you kind of have a little bit more patience.
And not to take it personally, because
Thank you. That's a very compassionate kind of approach.
Yeah, no, but I think compassion, it's a good word, Marion. we've seen that over COVID, where you've needed to really think in a different way to what you would expect, the isolation and the difficulties that each person's having, and every person's got their own difficult situation. Once you start talking to them, you can understand it. But I think there's always value in turning things around a little bit and thinking from the other point of view. Why have they become so emotional about something? What's caused this, and try and understand it from their point of view. That does require you to have some knowledge, and some people don't want to share their innermost feelings, and so it nearly becomes impossible. Not that oh God, I'm not a counsellor. I don't want to hear, that, but I do need to hear some things to actually understand where they're coming from. And so it's sometimes you need to call what you're seeing in a difficult situation. Just talk about it from your point of view and what you're seeing, and hopefully get enough information about how they're seeing it from their point of view. And then once again, coming to that, I see nothing wrong with a compromise in a situation like that. You don't have to be aggressive or assertive necessarily.
That's great, thank you. I'm just thinking about, we've been talking a lot about people who are being actively unfriendly. What about people who are being passively unfriendly? So just you're trying to engage them, you're trying to get them on board with your idea, or you need them to cooperate with you for whatever reason, and they just don't care. They just don't want to, they just don't want to engage at all. So it's not even kind of like that they're emotional or have an issue. It's just that they just don't want to engage with you in a way that you want to engage with them.
So hard, isn't it, to unpick what a person's going through. And on Zoom, it's most probably made it even harder, because you would have been able to read about a person's body language a little bit better than what you can in it. Like if you've got 10 people on a Zoom session when you're holding a meeting, it's very hard to see that one person sitting off on the side and they've virtually got their arms wrapped around them in a defensive mode. So the things that you would normally pick up on, you're not getting in this environment, which makes it a little bit hard. My blood ran cold, Marion, when you talked about that.
I'm so sorry. I guess I was just thinking of some scenarios like where, I've been a liaison librarian, you're trying to engage an academic to work with them, and they're just like, no, it's not even hostile, it's just not interested.
People are very flat right now too, so it's hard to build enthusiasm and engagement with that sort of feeling of
Look, I think sometimes you just celebrate your wins and cut your losses. In that situation. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's not your problem.
Some ways that I'm approaching things too is that we do have a lot of enthusiasm about what is happening at CAVAL, and it's sort of that flows on, projects that you're working on can sometimes, if that person hears about it or get involved, there's that flow that can help sometimes too. Wanting to be a part of something bigger.
I think it's accepting too that that you're not always going to win everybody over, and I mean, it's even it's a concept I'm trying to teach my children, is that not everyone is going to be your best friend, and that's okay.
It's a really good point, and focus on what you can achieve rather than what you're not achieving. It sounds very sensible. Thank you, and sorry for making your blood run cold.
The academic example is always really interesting, especially for anybody who is dealing with academics, because you could talk to them 1 month and you'll get a no, and then 6 months later, all of a sudden they're coming, oh, why didn't you tell me about this before?
It's very true.
Well, so there's that, willingness to hear from the other side. And I think once again, maybe just even trying to get one small win in there, one thing that you can establish just even a bit more of a relationship about.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. That's cool. I'll move on to something slightly different then. This one's been at the top of the list for a little bit. And I'm always worried about saying the wrong thing when I'm negotiating, or I end up compromising too much. How can I get around this? You cave too early.
What really, I think people worry about saying the wrong thing all the time. I mean, people that worry about saying the wrong thing probably hardly ever say the wrong thing. Like, what really is the wrong thing that you're going to say that's going to kill your negotiation? Yeah.
Depends a bit on the kind of negotiation as well. I mean, if it's, you know, Claire dealing with a client, like, you know, I suppose in that environment, I potentially personally might be worried I might say the wrong thing. But if I'm dealing with a vendor and negotiating on a contract, I would be less worried that I was going to say the wrong thing, because it's very sort of factual.
But is that because that's what you're familiar with, because you more are dealing with the vendor?
It's probably because, yeah, I guess it's a familiar, I can't even speak. It's like a routine, sorry, it's a routine kind of thing, but it's, you know, it's very clear what the goal is, I suppose, and I'm confident in what I'm saying. So
yeah.
I
think it would be okay. I really don't think that there's many people that say the wrong thing in a negotiation that way, that would, if they're worried about it. Like, what this might come from that question you had about keeping your cards close to your chest. Is that how you phrase it, Marion? Yeah, is that what the worry would be from?
Yeah, so some of it is saying the wrong thing, and some of it's ending up compromising too much. So perhaps, yeah, that whole sense of agreeing too early, perhaps, and then being unhappy about it.
Well, then I think that's when you pause and you don't agree to anything too early, and you sort of stay part of the negotiation. That conversation is happening at one stage, and then you think about what before you commit to anything.
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to just say, I need to think about this.
Yeah,
Claire?
make that break. Yeah, I think there's many times when I do worry about what I'm saying, because the idea that somebody is, you know, willfully disengaging, they also will willfully misconstrue what you're saying in some sort of negotiation, whether they're only hearing it that way, whether you truly do say something that's a bit borderline, because it can happen. In very tricky situations, you know, I do take somebody in to help me negotiate and keep the records straight, because you can get yourself into deep water. When I'm dealing with a disgruntled client, for instance, they can go directly to the VC with their complaint, and they will. It has happened, but you know.
But isn't that more about listening when it's a disgruntled client?
Oh, you listen, but they want you to fix whatever they saw was the problem. And if you say, well, I'm sorry, but that person acted in good faith, they did the right thing, they followed the procedure, you know, and if they're still not happy with the outcome, they will go higher. Yeah, and I think there's been a few people in our 146 people who face those sorts of situations, but you try your hardest and you do.
But I think with that person, it wouldn't have mattered what you said.
Yeah. No,
they'd already decided they were going to the Vice Chancellor.
No wonder they didn't go there first.
They probably had to follow a process.
I was going to say, yeah, they might have tried and been referred back. Well, have you raised it with the library? So it's just ticking the box for them, maybe. Yeah, it's a good point.
Or we get it down from the VC when it's come through.
Yeah. It's an I'm just going to pick up what you were saying before, Jamie, about people who are worried about saying the wrong thing generally don't. And is it that kind of overthinking thing? So, you know, the people who are worried about it will go in prepared. They'll have what they want to say prepared and ready to go. Because in my experience, people who do kind of say the wrong thing are often the ones that are oblivious to the fact that they've said the wrong thing.
Yes.
For want of a better term. So, you know,
it's and they weren't worried about it before going in.
No.
So they've if you are prepared and you know you're informed and you know what your argument is and you know what your outcome, what you want out of the outcome, I think that, you know, you're unlikely to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, and if you behave professionally and
of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything anyone would like to add to that? No. Okay.
Treat it seriously and not flippantly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the listening. No, but it's part of the listening as well. And even if it's a 20-cent fine, not that we fine at Deakin, we never have done. But like if it's something very trivial, the person's got the complaint for a reason. And then, just trying to understand it a bit more.
Also, I'm just wondering, is there any harm in, if you do feel like you've said the wrong thing, in backtracking and saying, no, that's not what I meant to say. This
of course not.
Yeah. So just owning up to it, just saying, look, that's not how I wanted to say that. That's not what I meant. Yeah. I
think that is what Claire initially said too, like something, what did you say, Claire, around if you say the wrong thing, you can completely say you've misunderstood me, or that's not how I meant to. It's what they hear can be wrong as well. So have another way of saying it.
Yeah, with the understanding of what was agreed upon, and why it was agreed upon. That's that protects you a little bit. But this is sort of getting out of negotiations, but it is trying to get a good outcome for everybody involved. You don't want to burn people, that's you want to feel that we can move forward, that we've dealt with that single complaint. So sometimes it's really about thinking about the issue at hand and not trying to solve the whole problem. And then other times you need to actually say, oh, here, there's more going on here than what I expected from the initial complaint.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I'll move on to another question then. And this is, how can we diplomatically decline opportunities, in double quote marks, for additional work when there is a power imbalance?
I mean, I guess it's about, can you say that again?
Sure, yeah. How can we diplomatically decline opportunities for additional work when there is a power imbalance? So I'm reading that as, additional work has been presented an opportunity for development, or it's being sort of sold to the person, but the person doesn't want to do it. So
maybe it's not an opportunity, it's more just extra work.
Maybe, or it's not regarded.
That's the way I'm sort of in, and maybe it's someone more senior is giving it to you and you feel like you can't say no. Yeah,
I think so.
Same approach as like really the others. You go in with what you can do and what you informed, go in informed, what you prepared for, what you want to say, go and say. And if the compromise is like, if they're trying to say, nope, this is the top priority, and then it's about saying, well, okay, well then this other stuff doesn't get done, and these are the consequences, and knowing that, and then the negotiation sort of begins about what does and doesn't get done.
Yeah, that's right. So what would you like me to stop doing? So like this kind of approach. Yeah. Anything to add?
I haven't got any magic for that one.
I actually think with all this, there's no magic, and there's not every negotiation is successful, and sometimes things go wrong, and that happens. Just be prepared.
Yep. Okay, so slightly meatier one then. So any suggestions on how to negotiate with difficult stakeholders in high-level library projects, such as international partners, donors, deans and faculties?
I'd be really drawing. Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, I mean, I would be, if I was dealing with really, really senior stakeholders, I'd be really reaching out to the very, very senior people in my area as well for support. I wouldn't be trying to tackle it on my own.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Thank goodness there's always somebody higher, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because even the VC has to report to the board. People become very one-eyed and focused about what they think is the very best thing to happen in there. And I think the same rules about, understanding the problem and getting to the meat of what they really want, and where has it come from. So doing your homework a little bit about it. But yeah, I think drawing in other people with different expertise as well. So it mightn't even be that somebody more senior, the UL or the DVCE or whatever it may be into the discussion, but it might be somebody with some really concrete knowledge and skills that you may be a bit light on, and making sure that it's a team thing, really.
What about the idea of something, if it's a library project and you've got difficult stakeholders, what about the idea of something like a reference group or, some sort of neutral arbiter? Like, would you ever set something up if it was going to be really difficult? Would you recommend doing anything like that?
I'm just trying to imagine a scenario where you've got something that controversial happening that you wouldn't get some sort of agreement for. So I'll pose a scenario. So this will affect all of us. So we decide as a library that we're not going to buy any more textbooks. Okay. And so we get backlash about that.
Yeah.
Well, that to me indicates there was lack of consultation and coming to a common understanding about what that would mean and how we were going to deal with it. So I think it's the way it was approached. I would be really questioning the way it was approached in the first place.
Yeah.
And not maybe the idea is great, but if you've got to, you have to. Not all decisions can be just, decided and then meted out. Especially
with multiple stakeholders.
Yes, I'm wondering if a difficult stakeholder is just someone that doesn't agree with you, so is that kind of, and as you're saying, you haven't done the due diligence to consider their position and their perspective and hear their ideas and perhaps incorporate them into the project.
Well, and the solution has to, something is in it for them as well. What's the benefit to them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Pick your
battle. Yeah, that's true.
Is it such a great thing that it is worth the battle?
What can you compromise and what's non-negotiable?
Yeah. All good tips. And just in the chat, someone said, if possible, get to know the stakeholders' PAs.
Oh, that's such good advice.
It is good
I feel
advice,
like I know who said that.
Yeah. And so look, I can't keep a really close eye on the chat as well as the slide over. They did catch my eye, and it's always a good tip. Yeah, the power behind the power.
They make timing calendars, so that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is a really open question, and it's quite different to some of the other ones. And so I'm going to ask it. So it's, what does a great negotiation look like to you?
Well, I think it's one where you've still got a good relationship with the person you're negotiating afterwards.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most important things.
Yeah, when you go into a negotiation, you know what you want out of it within sort of a, within reason. So you can, everyone in that negotiation, it lands within the sort of scope that they're all willing to compromise and negotiate with. And so there's that and that leads to the good relationship that keeps the good relationship going, and then you're likely to have a positive negotiation with them the next time. And whatever you've negotiated is probably going to go well because you've kept that relationship positive.
Coming to that sort of conclusion that both sides feel a bit satisfied with. Mightn't feel 100%.
That was what I was trying to say.
And that you've kept it civil.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard. I think that then, as Bron said, you can be discussing a very difficult topic, but if you haven't made it personal, then you can leave the room feeling like it wasn't personal, even if you lost a bit of ground, you know, and it's not life and death. And that you still like the person, even though you don't like, you know, maybe you're not completely satisfied with the outcome. And if you can be friendly during and after. Has anybody watched that movie? This is completely off the topic, but it isn't. Bridge of Spies. Has anybody?
Not that I'm aware of.
Ages ago?
Yeah, ages ago. So Harvard have set whole assignments around the negotiations that go on in A Bridge of Spies. He's the lawyer that goes in is Tom Hanks, of course, who I adore. And he goes in to negotiate for a pilot who's landed in Russia or something, and they meet on the bridge and they do the exchange and everything in that. Anyway, the reason why I'm talking about it is that he always, in the negotiation, he was affable, he was understanding, he would establish a rapport with the person. He held his line but was never aggressive. And it's one of the most, you know, like it's based on a true story that this guy actually did that. And so we were, you know, in one of the examples he did, he was meant to come out with 2 people who were captured, and he came out with 120 people who had been imprisoned, or 140 or 180 or something.
Wow.
So it's a terrific movie, and it's the moral compass that he brings to his discussions and negotiations that really make it a very valuable thing. So if you're interested in a bit of entertainment on the weekend, watch it, but just watch the way the negotiations unfurl. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating study. And then look up Bridge of Spies, and they ask the questions that they're asking their students to unpick in the negotiations from that. Is fascinating.
Thanks, Claire. I think that sounds like really fun homework for everybody. Thank you.
I'm going to watch it again, definitely.
The academic articles, no, sorry, but they made it into an academic exercise by the way that it was portrayed, because he was very well known.
So it sounds like, you know, there's results that everybody kind of wants and can live with, as well as that good relationship and rapport, and no one's compromised their integrity and all of those sorts of things. So would you agree that that's kind of what a good negotiation looks like? Yeah. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm guessing then a good negotiation doesn't deal with someone who is aggressive. So the question is, how do you deal with someone when they're really aggressive with the negotiation?
Well, it's not going to be a nice experience, the negotiation. I guess it's, sorry, Bronwyn, you'd probably be better at this.
Well, not really, because I don't think, again, like, given that we're the client, with the kind of negotiations that I mostly have, I wouldn't call it aggressive. We get publishers aggressively marketing to us to buy their stuff, but the word aggressive is probably it's pushy. It's a different kind of, and kind of just ignore it in those cases. So my experience is probably a little bit different. It's not. I don't think that's really a situation that I have, you know, been unfortunate enough to face very often.
I'm pleased to hear it. Yeah.
Aggression usually means highly emotional and charged.
Yeah.
And it can be very difficult to deal with. And that's when that whole trying to understand where the person's coming from. There was some advice that I read years ago, and it was about when you're prepared to go into a situation that is highly emotionally charged and could be aggressive, is to ask yourself the most difficult thing that person could ask you or speak to you about, and try and then unpick it from that point of view. So the question you don't want to be asked is what it is. What question do I not want to be asked in this meeting that we're coming to here? And then trying to approach it with a little bit of, you know, it's like pre-warning yourself about the dangerous things. That sometimes things just need to be taken a break needs to be taken if it gets too emotional. I think that time to settle down and reflect is really important. Also, that person might be better to put it in writing if they feel comfortable than in a discussion face to face, or they might feel better to be supported by a friend, a colleague, or a union person. And I've had all of those situations, and that's fine. I don't mind anybody bringing anybody along if it's going to help us get to some sort of solution, because you know, if they're that emotionally charged, then something's really wrong.
I would say too, you know, don't be afraid to bring in your own support person if someone's being really aggressive as well. Yeah,
aggressive negotiating, sorry, is also a style. That's some people's style to go in like that. And I think that this has happened to me earlier this year, and that what saved me was just being really informed, so I could always I tried to remain calm and back up with what I was saying with fact of what I knew, which eventually got to the outcome that I wanted. But it was a terrible experience, and it was something that was a very aggressive person that I think that was their style.
Yeah, okay. So I guess, yeah, be prepared for that.
Yeah, and calmly think about what the facts are. Just keep going back to the facts and trying to keep your emotion out of it. So it was just like, well, this is what I knew going in, that I could stand by through the whole and be confident and say confidently through the negotiation.
Yeah, and Claire, you talked about timeout, so perhaps just saying, I'm not prepared to deal with you while you're behaving this way. We need to just take a break and resume at another time, or as you say, suggest a different mode of communication. Would you be that explicit about it with someone that you find aggressive?
And also it's reverse bullying. So people think that they get bullied by their boss or that, but it can happen the other way, that the boss, I hate that word, but you know, the person trying to come to some sort of conclusion is nearly getting bullied, and a fair bit of intimidation. So I agree wholeheartedly. Take somebody else into the meeting as well, especially if they're bringing somebody. Have HR be part of the discussion, because they bring different skills. We at university, I don't know about you, Jamie, but we have industrial relations HR people that specialise in trying to sift through the issues and the problems with the person, and they're very used to negotiating. They negotiate in a completely different way to what we do. But if it gets pushed that far, bring in an expert. We can't possibly cover all bases in what we do and what we know. We can try and unpick it in the early stages, but if I've said there's some aggressive behaviours that are very entrenched, that have been there for a long, long time, and they're not going to be fixed easily at all.
That's a very good thought, Claire, that, yeah, it might be a long problem, not a quick one to solve, unfortunately. Yeah, thank you. So look, I'm just mindful of the time, so we've probably only got time for a couple more questions. So this next one is a little bit tangential, but would love to know the panel's thoughts on cold calling, reaching out to new stakeholders. How do you do this successfully? So I guess that's it's slightly tangential negotiating. You're negotiating for someone's time so that they hear you, perhaps.
It's good to have like what's the reason and what's the connection with the person. If you have a connection and a reason to have the conversation, that really helps get that person's time. I think it's really difficult to cold call right now. Is anyone at work to answer the phone? Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Yeah, reaching out to new stakeholders.
That's a good point there. What's the benefit to them? What's in it for them? Exactly.
No, that's true. And I think, just being open and friendly about why you want to have the discussion with them is the only way you can approach it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But don't take it as a personal affront because somebody's not going to meet with you. You're just not their priority. and it's not important at that minute in time to them. And as I said, 6 months down the track, it could very well be that it is the right time.
Yeah.
So, no, don't take the first no.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a good one.
I'm hearing lots today about perseverance and persistence and patience. You know, I didn't mean to make them all rhyme and start with P, but you know, it does seem to be a common thread. Preparation, you know, another P. Okay, so look, this one is another slightly tangential one. Some managers don't pay attention to good ideas because they're not theirs. None of you would do that, of course, but but down the track they come up with that idea as if it's theirs. What do you do then? That's kind of negotiating ownership of an idea, I guess.
So this in this scenario, this person must have brought up the idea and then been felt to be made it was a bad idea and let it go, so that later on that manager picked it up. So then we go back to that, don't let your ideas go, don't take that first no, keep going and find the way that you get your projects through so that can't happen.
Oh, look, it happens.
It does.
It definitely does. Yeah,
we're talking about
fallible
possible
humans
approaches,
and only half listening at a moment in time, and then going off, and the back part of a brain will process it. And all of a sudden, it, you know, sounds marvelous and wonderful. It's very peeving. I agree. You know, you can get people's nose out of joint, and also. I think the kindness lens is that you mightn't have been the only person to discuss it with that person. So sometimes when you present an argument, as we said, to the accountant, I learnt this at Monash when I was dealing with an accountant, he only talked in certain ways, and when you represented what we were presenting as a library to him, he then understood, and it worked out really well. So, but if you're you know, if you're not pitching it in the right way to the person that you want to influence, and they say no because maybe you didn't give the right context or gave too much of a story or whatever it may be, your approach was slightly wrong. And then usually good ideas spread a little bit, and it might have been reinterpreted by somebody else, or their brains reinterpreted what they've heard. So be a bit generous and be quietly prideful on the fact that your idea was actually taken up at some stage.
Yeah, I was just thinking that Claire, be grateful. Do you just settle for being grateful that it's finally got its time in the sun? Yeah, and it may not always be deliberate, you know.
And, you know, if it's an area of real interest to you, still try and get involved with it.
Yeah.
You know, and you can still get some of the credit perhaps that you feel you deserved by being a part of the project.
I was just thinking that, you know, if you get involved, then you can say, well, I've got all these great ideas because I've actually been thinking about this for a long time. And, you know, so I've got a lot of ideas to contribute to the execution or whatever it is.
And who knows, your idea mightn't have been original to you either.
The vicious circle. Yeah,
it's true.
Like you could have half heard something that you've gone away and reinterpreted and made your own. And so that feeling of ownership is actually quite a fraught area unless you've whacked your intellectual property stamp on it, and it's groundbreaking enough for it never to have been thought of anywhere else before. You know, as I've said in the past, it's pick your battles.
Also timing, the timing when you had the idea might not have been the right time for implementation. Sometimes later on, it's a better time.
Money.
Yeah, that's a big factor, I think, Claire.
Headspace.
I was just thinking headspace, all of the things. So can, you know, an idea coming successfully to fruition, there's so many variables that come into play, aren't there? So I'd be saying so try not to take it personally. So look, it's 3:26, folks, so I might not ask another question. I can't believe that it's already 3:26, and I can see that there's lots of stuff going on in the chat. So thank you to everybody for engaging in the chat while you're listening and for engaging with the Slido as well. That was really fantastic. So I am going to finish up now. So I will start by thanking Bronwyn, Clare and Jaime for their wonderful contribution and insights into this panel discussion. I think we can all agree that we've learned a lot from the depth and range of your experiences today. And thanking everybody who asked questions and attended the session today as well. And I'd particularly like to thank the PDIG committee and Sarah Davidson from CAVAL for organising the event today and hosting us. If you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to contact the speakers. With those, you can send an email to members@caval.edu.au and Sarah will provide you with the contact details, or look them up on LinkedIn or however else you might be able to find them. I'd also like to mention that PDIG and CAVAL have arranged for native trees to be planted throughout the organisation, the organisation 15 trees as a thank you to all the panellists. So thank you panellists, there's some trees out there with your name on them. Thank you to CAVAL for organising that. And then just finally, a reminder that the next PDIG webinar will be held tomorrow, which is Wednesday the 8th of September from 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And this webinar is a hands-on workshop around networking, and you can register through the link Sarah has popped into the chat if you haven't already. So we look forward to seeing as many of you tomorrow as possible. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.